All right, on this episode of Bouts Talking Bouts, got to shout out a couple of the sponsors here. Sovereign Extracts, you can check out a lot of their great stuff. They've got some CBD cartridges, THC, they've got some hybrid options as well, and also USG Canada, putting out some great gear for mixed martial artists, boxers, and the like. On today's episode, talking to the first ever UFC middleweight champion, a veteran of a variety of circuits, Bellator, Cage Rage, Sherdog, rings, just a really seasoned competitor, and I have Dave Menne on the show right now. How's your day going so far there, man?
Doing okay. Just getting back home. So running around trying to keep things going, I guess.
Yeah, staying on top of things considering the present situation. So good to hear that you're on top of things and making sure, things aren't getting out of hand there, man. So good to hear you're doing well with all the COVID-19 stuff going on.
Yep. So far my head's above water anyways, so hopefully that continues as the days progress.
Yeah, for sure, man. And I kind of wanted to talk about some of your, early forays into mixed martial arts and certain competition and stuff like that. Like I noticed you had a wrestling background as a youth, and then there was a bit of, that wrestling in college as well. When did, MMA kind of get on your radar and kind of represent something you wanted to get into eventually?
I think initially I was looking into doing some Thai boxing, actually, and I was spending some time and kind of jumping around the country a little bit, and ended up in New Mexico for a period of time, and I was staying in Santa Fe, and was working with a gentleman there, learning a little Eskrima, and also starting to dabble in some Muay Thai. The process of that, I ended up back in Minnesota. I was also training some Thai boxing and considering taking some ring fights in Thai boxing, which I took a couple above the weight, or like leg kick fights, I guess. Sorry. And in the process, the MMA started to become something of interest, I guess. It's something I saw early on in, I guess, high school, like the first couple, and then there was some calls out that there was going to be some small events locally. I had been training a little bit of jiu-jitsu at that time, and then decided to go see what it was about. The event, eventually, venue got canceled or stopped, and we ended up having the fights in a cold house in the middle of Wisconsin. So that was my first dabbling in MMA. So it was kind of interesting. People in front of the windows and in front of the radiators, so we didn't run into anything.
Yeah, and some early moments in your career that I found kind of interesting, because you were definitely still around when they were doing a lot of the tournaments that were spread over one night, two night kind of things. Like I noticed you were the first HooknShoot lightweight champion there in April of '97 there. So what was all that like? I mean, you end up going through this whole thing where you're beating 4 opponents over the course of 2 days. So what was that HooknShoot lightweight championship like from your perspective?
Well, it was, obviously it's different than nowadays. It was, obviously there's not a lot of money in it. You're traveling across the country to take 4 fights in one night, and then actually I fought in a no holds barred fight the next day at the one of the local dojos, where I fought in 2 days. I think I fought 5 times. So it's just I'm coming from a wrestling background where you had how many matches in a day. So if you're not getting punched, but or kicked, but you're it's something I was somewhat used to because of the background I was coming from. If that makes any sense. So it was not necessarily possibly ideal, but I guess we didn't have the idea what was ideal at the time. We were just doing what we did.
Yeah, I guess that's the thing with wrestlers, because not just on a stylistic level, but like you said, also on a competitive level. It's just the thing of competing multiple times in a single day, which in a lot of martial arts, or in certain martial arts, I should say, isn't necessarily a thing. But in wrestling, it's just like driving that point home, and just the work ethic seems like it lends itself well to MMA, especially in those, tournament days when it was more commonplace.
And back in like even my high school wrestling days, I mean, the tournaments up here were like my senior year. Our team tournament and our individual tournaments ran next the same time. So I had five whatever matches to the state finals, and then had 4 to 5 more matches in all the teams to the state finals. So you're having over 2 to 3 days, over 10 matches. By the end of it, you're basically, I remember that, by the end of it, I walked outside, and I'm like, the wind, it was still kind of a cold wind, and the wind hit my face, and I was like, ow, because so much of my skin had been worn off my face at that point. So it's just, it's not what a lot of other sports are used to, I guess.
Yeah, it definitely gives you that, strength of mindset to get out there and everything like that. But I mentioned in the intro there that you have the distinction of being the first UFC middleweight champion, and that's something that I find to be a curious thing, because obviously you had to have been quite enthusiastic winning the championship on the actual night of. But I'm kind of curious, is there like an increasing sense of esteem that comes with the championship, having this like lineage it has behind it now, and then just following mixed martial arts to some degree, seeing what the sport has evolved into, and just kind of being like, oh, I was the inaugural champion in this division. Like, is there a mounting, I guess, sense of esteem that comes with something like that?
I think I would say, I mean, it's probably a higher now than actually probably at the time, if that makes any sense, because there was other organizations out there that had reputable title holders, and there was world rankings, whether how accurate they were or weren't. There was other fighters that were in other organizations that were thought to be or at a higher level than some of the people initially that were in the UFC at the time. So but with the UFC taking so much of the minds of the people, and to what level it's raised itself, then the being the inaugural champion probably means even more now. So.
No, and that's a fair thing to bring up. And I was kind of curious too, because I know certain champions from that era would end up, leaving the promotion and competing for other organizations because certain offers were floated their way that, proved a little more, I guess, appealing on a monetary level, perhaps. Was there any kind of thing like that that came your way when you were UFC middleweight champion, whereby other promotions were touching base with you to gauge your interest level? Because champions in UFC around that time would, go to like Rings and K1 and some of these other promotions. So was there anything in that regard that happened to you, or not so much?
I had an offer on the table to go to I had to make a choice between Pride and the UFC, actually. So after the Kuwait Sherdog tournament, from what I was told, my understanding of it, I had offers from Pride and the UFC, and we ended up going the road of the UFC rather than taking the Pride contract. So we had other people touch base here and there with things, so there was offers here and there, and sometimes they, obviously the amount of media coverage and visibility you get with the UFC wasn't what it was then. Now the amount of people that get to know you and the money you can make off of having a name through the UFC can be possibly more lucrative than even winning your fights.
Was there anything mapped out in the Pride agreement as far as like specific opponents or anything like that, or just a general offer of like you could come over and fight in Japan if you were interested?
I can't recall the details directly about the contract. I think one of the things Pride was often a no weight class situation. I was a tiny 185-pounder for the time in all reality. So, I had fought in no weight class tournaments. I had done well fighting some bigger opponents, but it just seemed, I think, came down partially to that. It was, am I going to be fighting a 265 or a 300-pound guy in pride? Or does it make more sense to fight someone around my weight?
Yeah, for sure, because those kind of matches did, happen in Pride back in the day, what with there not being any kind of like rock solid regulatory body to oversee those kind of things. So fair enough.
But I don't remember the exact details of the contract at this time or what the offers were. It just was at the time UFC seemed to be a better step forward as far as a pursuit for a career.
Yeah, for sure, man. I definitely get what you're saying on that end of things. But I mean, just a interesting trip overall. I mean, like there was that instance where you were in Kuwait and stuff like that, and you ended up going over there for the one night middleweight tournament there. What was that whole experience like? I mean, Pat Miletich's disastrous trip to Kuwait there, the one night tournament going on, like still a war torn kind of a situation. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of facets to that are, kind of unusual and intriguing to say the least. So I'm kind of curious, like, what was that whole experience like there, just being, tied up in all of that there?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of trippy. I mean, you're walking into the airport, you get whisked through. Basically, you don't go through customs. When people grab you, we got brought down to some private room. Some people brought in some like fresh squeezed strawberry on silver plates for everybody, and then we were off to the hotel, which was also kind of the tournament. All was kind of an odd experience. We got there. I was getting ready to cut weight. I had my scale in my room. We get to the day of weigh-ins, and we are told up to it that there is going to be no weigh-ins. And all of a sudden we're like, what? And then they said they didn't have a scale. I'm like, well, I got a scale I told Pat I got a scale in my room. He told me to go get it. So we get an idea of what, some of these people were weighing in. But the Russians were obviously considerably overweight. I think one of them that was going to fight Ami was like somewhere close to 245 pounds. And this is 185. And he was an alternate for a 185-pound tournament. Yeah, so. And Barklov was somewhere over 2 something. But it was kind of an odd experience. From my understanding, what I was told was most of the Russians were there or the couple of Russians were there for 2 to 3 weeks before the tournament. A lot of us got in, either the night before weigh-ins or that morning. So it was not an ideal situation, I would say. So, and there was a decent amount of drama up to it, and then a little bit of drama afterwards. Right now, I think it's actually going. Monty Cox is writing his book on some of the early days of MMA and some of the people that he dealt with, and there's actually, I believe, a chapter or a part of his book that goes over some of the stuff that happened and that we had to deal with in Kuwait. So it was definitely an interesting tournament. We had Pele, Newton, Hughes, me. So 4 guys at the time that were rated in a lot of the ratings in the top 5 in the world in one tournament. And then Barklov, obviously, he won ADCCC or Abu Dhabi, and was a scary dude. So it was an interesting tournament. I just wished I think something like that was put on today. That would be probably quite a bit more money. Even though the payday wasn't bad at the time, but I could have probably probably retired off of what the payday would be nowadays. So.
Yeah, so they've got those different PFL tournaments nowadays and stuff like that. And we've been talking about the tournament structures in MMA. What are your thoughts on something like PFL? Because that seems to marry the parts of the tournament structure that you seem to enjoy, but also there's that, money at the end of it that you can kind of retire on sort of thing. So what are your thoughts on that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I've talked a couple times with people about that. I haven't stayed. I would have to look just at the business model, see who they're bringing in. It sounded very interesting to me, obviously, and I was a fan of the idea. But there's a couple other things that I've been fans of that just they didn't take in the end. So I'm I've been a huge part of the sport for a long time. I'm always like to see good production and other people putting out good products. It opens the game for more people to stay in the game, and more people to feed themselves, right? If this is what they're wanting to do. So initially, what I was told about PFL, I was an immediate fan of the idea. We'll see how it all comes to fruition in the coming days or years.
Yeah, for sure. I get what you're saying on that end, but something I was noticing in doing my research on you too, I've seen some older articles, like for instance, the post-fight interview after you beat Jotaro Nakao there, you were referred to as the Iceman instead of the nickname that a lot of people know you for, which is the Warrior. I'm kind of wondering, when did that nickname change sort of take place?
I think part of the reason the nickname changed on the Iceman was because Chuck started using it regularly. And the reason they initially started calling me the Iceman was because I didn't show a lot of emotion, right? Nakao at the time was had just beat Pat. He was rated pretty high, and I was like, I won the fight, and I was like, cool. So in the process of that, I think that's kind of where the nickname came about. Is that I wasn't always showing a super amount of emotion, which doesn't always play into the way the sport has evolved, right? We have quite a few drama queens in the ranks, but so changing it or why it came, I had just won the Warriors War in Kuwait. In the process of winning the Warriors War in Kuwait, I sent in my song for the UFC. My interest music was, Scarface, the war, where they're clicking the bottles, Warriors come out to play.
Yeah.
In the process of that, and Dana made the suggestion of having my nickname be the Warrior. I won the Warriors War. There was another article in the nature of calling me a warrior, I guess, around that time. And then it happened, my friends gave me that song, and I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. So I sent that in, and the rest was history. If that makes any sense? So I was never big on into nicknames, so I was like, sure, that sounds good.
Yeah, it was just kind of like, whatever you guys want to call me, whatever works kind of thing for you, right? Like you weren't so caught up on, I need to stick with this certain nickname.
Yeah, it's not something that I dwelled on that much. So it's, I guess in the end, it's a good nickname, right? So, but it's a matter of the fight game and everything nowadays has become I guess maybe it was at that time, and I should have maybe engaged more into the nature of branding myself and making my self-known and out there more, right? Because the more people that know you, the more eventually you get paid, right? But I was more concerned about fighting.
Yeah, and to that point, I mean, in the UFC Fight Pass Where Are They Now feature, you'd made some comment where you were saying that a return to MMA could make sense if it happened to be the right fight. Is there still some semblance of that being the case, or are you not really looking at that so much anymore? Like, what, I guess, would resemble a right fight that would entice you to get back and do it one more time?
Well, just someone calling me and paying me something that makes it worthwhile. You know, so I would. That's basically all I would take. You have to give me some time. Give me I would say 4 months ago I would have been in good enough shape to start a to start a camp. But I would, like 2 months ago, I would have wanted a month to 2 months of in the gym sparring and rolling with people that are trying to submit me and take me out. But I'm still occasionally go to gyms and stuff like that. But who, a lot of the places there's a limited amount of people that I feel can a lot of times push me. So I think in those situations, then I would probably have to go find the right place to train, and then I have to spend a little time getting hit in the head for a while to see, how that goes. I still spar here and there, but typically with people I'm doing privates with and I'm training. So I'm touching them, I'm not hitting them, if that makes any sense. If I'm hitting them, they're not going to pay me. So yeah. From that standpoint, the right payday and some time to make it make sense to me, and that would probably solidify it.
Yeah, fair enough, man. I understand why all those things would be important parts of this, but I'm also curious because you have quite a few, name-worthy victories over your career, noteworthy names over your career, I should say. Names like, Carlos Newton and Pele and just some real high-level guys that you've been able to get in there with over the years. I'm kind of wondering, is there a fight that represents your, I guess, like, best performance, like where you were in that, flow state, everything's clicking right, this is like the best representation of my total skill set as a martial artist? Like, was there any, like, defining sort of performance in that regard that you would maybe put above the rest in terms of getting to that flow state?
I mean, I guess I'd have to sit and probably think about that for a period of time. I mean, there's, I would say up there, the Pele fight at the time was, I was somewhat unknown at the time. He was in a lot of the rankings, number one in the world. I looked like a freaking 14-year-old kid. I think I upped my level for that. The whole tournament in Kuwait, you could say that was I was more there and on spot. And there's like some unknown. I can't even think of the name of the kid. Not that he was amazing or anything, but there was a fight in like St. Louis at the time. I think I hit a rolling knee bar off of it, and just going in there and everything just kind of clicked. Kid was tough. He was a decent level wrestler and stuff like that, but everything went according to plan. If that makes any sense. So that would be. And like I said, I don't recall the name, and that side of it wouldn't be that impressive. It's just that when you're in there and you know everything's firing right. So, because I've had several situations where I've walked in there and I'm just not working. Stuff isn't coming together. Whether I had a couple situations of various uncommon illnesses that crept up on me right before fights, including Connecticut fight with Bustamante, but that hit half the card, where half the card was throwing up and shitting themselves before the fight. So, but I would say probably offhand, Newton, Pele, and there's a couple smaller fights where that wouldn't be, people wouldn't know about it, but it's just when you're in there and everything goes exactly how you want it to go. And I'd even say that the first HooknShoot probably went pretty well for me, even though it's not high level competition. Everything clicked or felt like it clicked when I was in there.
Yeah, you mentioned that situation though where like the circumstances aren't super ideal and like they had that adjoined restaurant, like the buffet situation, which was strangely enough called the Octagon there and everything. And it seemed like you were in a rough spot in the actual fight itself. Like you were saying that you didn't get a chance to, get over it, your hearing was off and stuff like that. Is there some utility you get from performances like that though, where it's like, oh, worst set of circumstances and I end up coming through and performing reasonably well, all things considered. Like, is there like a galvanizing of your mental strength or fortitude or anything of that sort?
I mean, I guess in life, I mean, maybe you look at a given situation, like, oh, well, I did this and I did that under those circumstances. And I mean, there's some pretty sketchy shit that I've done that in, the only thing in retrospect is I would never fucking let a person do it. So I was the person cornering you. I'd be like, no fucking way. No. So I mean, it's, but maybe it prepares you for something. But hopefully it doesn't, because I'd be fucking afraid for whatever the fuck I was being prepared for. If that's the case. But, yeah, some of the decisions I made were probably not necessarily the best life decisions, but I did them in some of the situations. Like I was talking to, I think I was talking to Mommy and a couple of people. I'm like, yeah. Well, I went over some of the things that happened, and some of these fights I won, but there's no way in God's green earth I should have fucking been fighting. I passed the medicals, but I'm like, yeah, no. Under no circumstance would I let one of my fighters fight like that. So, but whatever. Vision, some hindsight's 20/20, right? So. And some of those times is like some of the fights and some of the stuff you're going through with is you need to, you train for the fight. There's a limited amount of money in the organization. You need that to continue on your road, right? You spend a month or 2 months into a camp and you have your bills, and all of a sudden shit comes down. We didn't have a parachute at that time, so sometimes you just needed to if you wanted to eat. That makes any sense?
Yeah, definitely, man. I understand what you're saying there and what you're, laying out and all that. But you've been really good with your time as well. I'm kind of curious if there's, sort of anything that you'd like to kind of add as a parting thought as we're getting ready to wrap up here.
Add to what now?
Oh, I'm just wondering if you had anything you wanted to add as a parting thought, just because kind of wrapping up here, and I just want to be mindful of your time.
Oh no. I don't know. Just keep it real, and thanks to the fans for the people that have followed me through the years, and keep it real, I guess.
It's a good parting thought. I like that. Thanks for the time, Dave. Really appreciate all the insights you were able to give me. And yeah, just again, really appreciate the time and hope you have a great rest of your night too, man.
You too. Thank you.